When we get to the front, we'll watch every meeting in.
And trust me, any hecklers will be severely dealt with by these lot, I'm telling you. Now, I'm the Colin Hampton, the coordinator of Derbyshire Unemployed Workers Centres. I'm also the secretary of North Derbyshire Unite Community. And as you can imagine, we aren't the richest organisation in the world, but we manage every year to try and come down and organise a Fringe at the TUC to try and make sure that the issues that are facing the unemployed and people in the wider community are reflected in the proceedings here. And so, like I say, we're not the richest in the world, but we have a lot of friends. And I'd like to first of all introduce Tom Jones from Thompson Solicitors, who's helped and supported us by providing the food, which I hope you're all going to enjoy and stuff in your pockets as you leave. So Tom, would you like to say a few words to start with?
I'm going to be very brief. One of the things, when people say, here's a word for our sponsors, which you normally switch off the TV and go make a cup of tea or get out. I'll be very brief. It's fantastic. I've skimmed through the report, looks like great stuff, but it's odd in the sense Thompson and the union generally don't necessarily come across zero-hour contract workers very often, since they tend not to be unionised. They're in the most precarious work, and therefore they're not necessarily people who we see that often. But it's very clear if in New Zealand, as they have been banned zero-hour contracts, there's absolutely no reason why they don't in this country, and it is a shame on our country and our work system that is allowed to continue and continue to exploit the way they are.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now, I just want to give a good background and context to the report. You may know that the Sports Direct campaign, I'd never thought when they shut the pit in Shirebrook that Shirebrook would be the centre of industrial relations news 30 or 25 years after the pit shut. But one of the things that came out of the shining a light on the activities of Sports Direct was the stories from people of the exploitation that was taking place. And this exploitation was hidden because people had no means by which to bring about a grievance, and the fear of bringing about a grievance because evidently you were going to lose your job or lose hours. And people kept saying to me, well, this is not just about Sports Direct. This is endemic throughout the sectors and throughout the community. So Unite Community in North Derbyshire wanted to look and examine the extent and reach of zero hours and try and dig down to find these stories of exploitation. And it wasn't difficult, but the first thing we had to do was to get the support and help of academics. And through Malcolm Moore, one of our members, I was introduced to Helen and Daiga, and we quickly put together a plan to try and bring together this report. And I'm told it's absolutely amazing that researchers have managed to turn around a report. I think we started back in January and we had the report out in July. So I had them on a 0 hours contract, of course. But I'd like to thank them in advance for the report. And in starting our evening tonight, I want them to talk about the research that they've undertaken as part of our work. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I suppose in the olden days, when I was young, agency work, if you thought of working for an agency, it was because of some sort of job demand spike. So I worked in a toy factory at Christmas, people worked during the holidays for an agency. But it's not like that today. And the so-called non-standard employment, it certainly isn't the norm. But on the other hand, it's increasingly a feature of the UK labour market since the crisis and recession in 2008. So it takes loads and loads of different forms. You can be working for a temporary agency, you can be a casual worker, you can be an involuntary part-time worker, on-call, 0 hours contract. quite often you're misclassified as well as being self-employed worker when actually you're really not a self-employed worker, you're a worker. So yes, the story began with Sports Direct because 80% of those workers were on 0-hour contracts and the majority were recruited through agencies. And United uncovered the draconian working conditions, bullying, harassment and so on, and culture of fear. And what we started to find was a very, very cosy relationship with Job Centre Plus and agencies. So you went to sign on and all the jobs offered were through agencies. And because of sanctions, if you didn't sign up to an agency, there was a big danger that you would face sanctions. So it was a case of enforced working, if you like. And the agencies, got free rooms, and the Job Centre Plus would help them recruit workers and so on. And they really didn't care less about working conditions or employment rights or anything. They just wanted to fulfill their contract. And the Job Centre Plus just wanted to get people off the books. Anyway, I'll come back in a minute, but I'll hand you over to my colleague Daiga, because one of the first things we did was look at the stats and do a bit of number crunching. So the number crunching expert here, Daiga, I'll lead you through some of the trends into this session.
Thank you, Helen. I won't bore you with the graphs and charts and tables. The question is Sports Direct in Derbyshire something exception, something that's happening only there, or are there hours more common? If you look at the numbers, you can see that at least 1.3 million people in Britain work in temporary agency places or under 0 hours contracts. I'm saying it's at least 1.3 million because it's very difficult to count people who don't have permanent employment relationships. These precarious working conditions have grown since the recession 2008, and the levels of temporary agency work and 0 hours contracts have reached this historical height since the records began. So temporary agency work used to be something exceptional. Now it's becoming more and more commonplace. Sometimes you can hear an argument that these types of work or jobs offer employees some flexibility. Workers want jobs with flexibility. However, when we asked workers themselves, we found that 4 out of 5 people in temporary agency jobs say, I did not want a temporary agency work. I wanted a permanent job. So the drive for flexibility does not come from workers themselves. It comes from employers, from their demands. When we look at who are temporary agency workers and 0 hours workers, they tend to be people from most vulnerable groups. Most likely they're migrants, especially recent migrants. They're also young people who, for them, this might be the first work experience. Also ethnic minority groups. Working conditions in temporary agency work and 0 hours jobs are a temporary agency worker earns 30 to 50 pounds less a week than a permanent worker in a comparable occupation and workplace. That's a huge difference if we add it 4 weeks and months. These people in agency work also often report that they don't have enough working hours, which leads to problems of paying the bills, buying food, and buying childcare, and etc. So these are national figures. They say that Derbyshire and Sports Direct is not an exception. It's something that's happening nationally. And now we'll let Helen to give you some examples of lived experiences of workers who work in these working conditions.
I won't go through loads and loads of stories because you can read the report yourself, and there's some quite poignant stories of cruel and unusual treatment really by this Tory government of human beings. But just to draw out a few things, one thing is shift. Maybe you get 1 shift a week and then maybe 40 shifts the next week. You get a shift if you're face fit, if you're servile. if you don't complain about health and safety, for example. There's lots of bullying and victimisation goes on in the workplaces. So mainly it's underemployment, but there's also overemployment as well. So one of the care workers in this report, working all night, and then the agency is saying, oh yeah, but we haven't got anybody to work today. Could you also just continue working? You've worked all night, can you carry on today as well? Well, he said, no, I just can't physically do it. And so he didn't get any more work for 3 months. That's the kind of punishment involved. Pay, I mean, if you're working 1 shift and then 5 shifts and then 40 shifts, your pay just fluctuates. And that means poverty, it means debt, it means housing problems. And the law centre we spoke to, and also Derbyshire advisors, Unemployed Workers Centre advisors. One of the things that's difficult is explained to a judge, say, in an eviction hearing, well, what is a 0 hours contract? You know, why can't we set up some kind of debt repayment plan? Well, it's hard to do that if you're, you know, working 1 shift 1 week and 10 shifts the next and so on. And you can imagine this fluctuation, this insecurity is stressful, and it leads to uncertainty and more poverty and so on, and health and well-being issues and there's quite a few stories about that in the report. And can you imagine trying to organise your family life around this type of ways of working? So often you get very, very short notice about a job. They'll say, can you go to such and such a place and make sandwiches? And you've got to be there in an hour's time. But you go there and you don't know whether your shift is going to be 2 hours or 12 hours. They might want you to do so many sandwiches. If you do them, make more in 2 hours, fine, go home, your shift's finished. Or if you haven't made enough, it could be 12 hours later and you're still working there. They are linked to sanctions. So one example was Bob in the report. He was told you've got a job 30 miles away, he's got no money, he's got no transport. And he said, I can't do it, it's a travel expenses involved. No. Well, he turned the job down and he faced sanctions because of that. It's just, as I say, cruel and unusual treatment. One of the striking features, actually, for me was that so many of the interviewees had absolutely no idea who they worked for. They didn't know what contract they were on. It's not legal, but quite a few of them didn't get contracts, and they didn't get pay slips, or they were online and difficult to access. And then sometimes bogus deductions were made, and the pay slips were very confusing. And agencies, really, they were quite willful and belligerent at times, really, about basic employment rights and what people are entitled to and something like that. There's a story here about people doing a long shift and not even getting paid for it. And they were sent there by an agency, and the agency said, oh, well, it's just induction. So I phoned this agency up and they said, oh, well, employers like to try before they buy. And really, it's benefiting the claimants so they can see if they will like the work or not. Obviously, few training opportunities, very little prospects, lots of discrimination. So if you're self-employed, you do have fewer rights, for example. And one woman, she wore a company uniform, read a company script, went to the same place every day. That's a worker, it isn't a self-employed worker. But she was being sexually harassed at work. And if you're self-employed, you can't go to the equality, you can't take a case under the Equality Act 2010. And so, again, the job centres and the advice centres have to spend a lot of time proving that somebody's a worker and not a self-employed worker, so that basic rights are upheld. The opportunity for trade union representation, as you can imagine, is very low, but there is organisation. But before we go on to learn about what Unite has done in collective struggle and what's to be done, I'm going to hand you over to Owen, who's going to talk a little bit more about the power imbalances involved.
Great, thanks so much. My name's Owen Espley. I'm the Senior Economic Justice Campaigner. No, not at all. I'm the Senior Economic Justice Campaigner at War on One. I lead our Stand With Migrant Worker and Precarious Contract campaign. I'm also the shop steward, Unite shop steward at War on One. So particular pleasure to be on the platform with Steve. And thanks a lot to Colin and the Derbyshire Unemployed Workers Centre for inviting me. This is really top quality research, and we need to get it out there a lot more. My own personal experience, the first time I went to work was to an agency. I've had that experience of not knowing when they're going to call up for different jobs. Happy to say that Walmart conditions are a little improved on that. But I've also had that experience of going to job centres and the kind of what I sort of describe as lunacy of the system that kind of throws you, how it doesn't really address, where you need to work. But what I really want to talk about is that power imbalance that precarious contracts create, and then say a few things about how at Walmart we're trying to build the kind of movement and our role, play a role in building the movement, and the kind of power that we need to build to overcome that power imbalance. In our End Precarious Contracts campaign, we've been clear that by precarious contract, we mean any work where your boss or supervisor has the kind of discretionary ability to withdraw future shifts. Recent research from Oxford University found that 4.6 million workers, 14.7% of the UK workforce, routinely suffer what they call manager-controlled alterations to their schedule. Now, first off, it's important, I think, that we do away with the myth that this flexibility demanded of workers' time is somehow brought about by modernity. That to be competitive in the modern world means modern production needs variability in the amount of labour. It's just not true. There is little correlation between variability of work needed and the use of these contracts. We see them rise sharply in education, in care work, and elsewhere. And even in sectors like Sports Direct, as the IT software behind modern logistics chains is fully capable of workforce planning to a high degree of accuracy, perhaps allowing for slight variations for the weather occasionally. So it isn't to ensure, why isn't this kind of same software used to ensure predictability of hours is a question we need to ask. And the reason, I believe, is because of the power it gives bosses over workers. It's about discipline and control of workers and better exploiting them for profit. And as you'll see, if you pass by our store, we don't believe there's anything modern about exploitation. What the basis for this power is the threat that it holds to what I would call social reproduction. It's about the ability to reproduce ourselves, to look after our friends and families, to ensure we have food and shelter. Without the hours, how will you eat? How will you pay the rent? How will you buy the birthday presents for your children or pay the train fare to visit your kids? This is compounded by the unpredictability of hours, meaning how can you make family commitments on time? The work of social reproduction overwhelmingly falls on women. That means that the threat that precarious contracts have is inherently gendered. And I think the extremely important link that this research makes is that that threat works where there isn't an effective social safety net. And it's worth remembering that migrant workers increasingly do not even have access to the poor benefits that we're taking away. That's up to 20% of the workforce, but even much higher in certain sectors don't have that social safety net. And we see that imbalance of power also in the complete unaccountability that managers and supervisors hold over workers. The horrendous abuse that United has exposed at Sports Direct, sexual harassment, abuse, bullying, and so on. Speak to the McDonald's workers on the Muck strike, workers who bully, workers who are petty-minded, and so on and so forth. And this research, is another piece of evidence that shows this right across the economy. Bullying bosses know they have the cards and they have the ability to take your future hours away from you. But that power imbalance also reinforces racism and sexism within the labour market. Precarious contracts do. They're both a cause and an effect of discrimination. It's an effect because the work that marginalised groups do is more likely to be considered suitable for precarious contracts, because BME workers are 3 times more likely to be on a precarious contract. There was a recent study I read from a Chicago workers' centre where they sent different race and gendered workers into an agency for the warehouse in there, and lo and behold, different people were offered different types of jobs along race and gender lines. Women workers were not offered the higher paying forklifting job. There's no doubt that that kind of activity takes place again in agencies in the UK. These agencies have the discretionary power to allocate and take away work. It's also a cause of discrimination in the labour market. Because when you're on a precarious contract, you're less able to challenge bullying and abuse in the workplace because of the fear that your future out in the taken away. You're less able to push for better wages. There's evidence that shows that those on 0-hour contracts earn 7% less or £1,000 a year less than equivalent workers in the same sectors. What we also see is that time after time, racial and gendered segregation on the job, supervisors from one ethnic group, those that supervise on another, or a gender division of labour, creates the conditions for the severe sexual harassment and racist bullying that time after time we see with these kinds of precarious contracts. It's also, I think, important to have a thought to how do those who argue in favour of precarious works try and justify it. They'll often try and justify it in terms of what you might call an atypical worker, but not necessarily atypical in terms of numbers. They conjure up a student for whom it's holiday pay around their studies. They say it's a mum returning to work, fitting work around childcare, or the migrant worker who comes over for seasonal work. These are the images which are used to justify precarious kinds of contracts. But aside from missing the point that these workers do not need to be less empowered at work than other workers, they need to be more, it also shows how the racialisation and gendering of work is used to undermine the universality of workers' rights. It's that universality which I think is central to how we need to build our power to overcome the imbalance of power that precarious contracts create. First, I think it's worth us considering the different sets of rights you get when you are considered by the law an employee, when you're considered just a worker, or when you're self-employed. Those social rights, often things like maternity, paternity pay, sick pay, and so on, are rights that speak to the social division of labour. But they also, that hierarchy often overlaps and mirrors racial and gender hierarchies. The leaked Home Office immigration document that we saw last week also shows there is a clear hierarchy being prepared for the workforce post-Brexit. You'll have a hierarchy of a citizen, someone with settled status, those who might be on a tied temporary visa, guest workers we might call, and then we might call undocumented workers. And again, each of those with different migration status will have different access to social rights. And this is not an accident. We need to understand this embedding of hierarchies as the response of the right to the insecurity that austerity and decades of the failed neoliberal project has created. That insecurity, the right attempts, that retrograde step of instituting that hierarchy, keep everyone in their place. We see it in the rising tide of racism, sexism, and anti-migrant sentiment. It aims to keep everyone in their place, migrant, young worker, and so on, and it uses the repressive tools of the state to maintain it. We criminalise undocumented workers, we have racist immigration raids, we have the threat of arrest, detention, and deportation, which lies behind every migrant worker's precarity. We see it in extending right-to-work checks to employers. We see it also in the innocuous-sounding data-sharing agreement between public services. Schools are collecting data on migrant children, nurses and doctors are forced to check immigration status, and mass surveillance is growing across our society. These are the tools to institute that kind of hierarchy. And so when we build our power in response to it, we must ensure that we proclaim the universality of workers' rights and build workers' rights campaigns that integrate the fight against racism, against sexism, and the fight for migrant justice. There can be no exceptions to those rights. The women worker, migrant worker, the undocumented worker must all have access to them. What this report does in bringing those things out of the shadows is to have that discussion within our society. We need to bring bullies out and show them for what they are. And we also need to mobilise our communities. I think community mobilisation is incredibly important when we're talking about campaigns around precarious work. It supports workers to be able to go back on the job and not fear losing future work. It empowers workers and it rebalances that fight between bullying bosses and precarious workers. It's also that community mobilisation that can ensure that that lack of a social safety net doesn't provide a barrier to claiming those rights. And so we must mobilise our communities and society as a whole in support of workers who are organising themselves. 411 is not a trade union. We don't organise workers, but we can offer and mobilise our supporters in support of trade union activities that are organising workers. And there are lots of good examples of how we've tried to do this. We've organised Day of Actions in support of the Sports Direct Shame campaign. We've done digital campaigning. We've learned a lot from the amazing work of Unite Community. We want to get these issues out broader and into society. We've supported the MUP strike both digitally, online, but we've also got stuck in and helped and offered some of the skills and capacities that as an NGO we have. We've also offered us support to the BARTs striking workers, largely migrant workers, fighting for 30 pence an hour, an entirely reasonable demand. We want to publicise and support more of these struggles of precarious workers. Our supporters are actually hungry for these campaigns to take actions, and we must also recognise that the campaign against precarious work is a campaign against sexism, it is a campaign against racism, and it is a campaign for migrant justice. And so that campaign itself must put those affected workers' voices, as this report does, at the very centre of that struggle. When you saw the strike workers on the television, on broadcast media last week, we know what excellent advocates for this justice they can be. But that in itself isn't anything new for our movement. If you go back to the 1880s, the birth of unionism, massive struggles against precarious work, community mobilisation, migrant and non-migrant workers were campaigning together against exploitation. We need to say that clearly, that labour history is migrant history, and we need to celebrate that history, whilst also being aware where some of the low moments of the trade union, of labour movement history, hasn't covered itself with glory in the support of the fight for migrant justice. But when it has been strongest, it has always sought to remove the barriers between workers in that struggle for justice. And the good news is that it is happening now, today, this week in our society. I believe honestly that we could be at the start of a movement capable of winning mass success to reverse the deterioration that precarious contracts have provided. Migrant-led campaigns, or campaigns with significant migrant workers, are at the centre and the forefront of our struggles against precarious work. The Sports Direct Shame campaign, the Unison branch of SOAS that recently won a reversal to outsourcing, cleaners at LSE winning equality with in-house staff, workers at Bath Hospital fighting for dignity in one of the largest cleaner strikes in history, the MUP strike workers, which includes migrant workers within them, Uber drivers tackling exploitation of the gig economy. These campaigns are showing us the way forward. They're winning, and all of them have mobilised and used the solidarity of the wider community to enable them to win. So let's build that movement. Let's stand with migrant workers and let's end precarious contracts.
Thank you very much, Owen. Owen mentioned that there's nothing new about exploitation, and it's interesting that when we started with the Sports Direct campaign, one of our management committee, in his 80s now, he's recently written a book about the butty system in the coal mines in the East Midlands. Now, most people wouldn't know what the butty system is, but the Sports Direct warehouse is built on the site of the Sheffield colliery. And back in the 19th century, the pits didn't employ the miners. They paid butty men to round up men in a pub, get them to do a stint down the mine, and then on a Sunday, they all used to go down to the pub and they were paid out to the tea. Now, it's strange really that we come all this way, and really that's pretty much how they've gone back to that, but the interesting thing about my colleague's book was that the primary reason for the existence of butty men was to stop workers organising. If you could get them competing, if you could get them in fear, then they were never going to organise because they wouldn't get selected in the book to go to work. And so the other issue that has really benefited our work in North Derbyshire is the incredible work of United setting up United. It's given us the opportunity to raise issues that previously we found difficult to get onto the agenda. Because, generally speaking, the trade unions organise in the public sector, and a lot of the peripheral workers, basically, it's very difficult to organise, so sometimes it's more easy not to actually make the effort and try. And when we look at the problems that we faced at Sports Direct, you would think, well, it's too difficult. But a fantastic campaign has been organised. Workers are getting organised. We still have a massive job to do, not just at Sports Direct, but right throughout our communities. And so it's really important today that we have Steve here to talk about how we're going to drive this campaign forward. Steve Turner.
Well, stand like you. Well, thanks for that, Colin. Thanks for everything you do, actually. On behalf of the group, on behalf of United, just where you are, but that's pick that up. And can I thank all of you for all the work that you've done in producing what is a fantastic and readily accessible piece of work, which I think is going to be incredibly important in terms of raising the challenges that precarious work does raise, and we need to find solutions too. So look, where do we start on Sports Direct? I mean, where do we start on 0 hours? 0 hours employment was not actually the issue at Sports Direct. Sports Direct employed 4,000 agency workers on short-hour contracts. And 0 hours contracts are just another form of exploitation. And you're absolutely right. The thought that we had from Owen there was a fantastic description of where we've been and also where we need to go perhaps as well. But you know, the reality is that we find 4.6 million workers on self-employed, bogus self-employed, many of them, of course, as if they're entrepreneurs and they're out there in their own right, trying to make a living as self-employed plumbers or building workers or researchers or academics or whatever they may be classing themselves as. We have the casualisation of work. We have temporary workers and we have millions and millions of agency workers, of course. And then we do have officially 900,000 0-hours workers. We believe that's a gross underestimation of just how many workers are forced onto 0-hours contracts. And 0-hours contracts are probably the most extreme and obscene version of the level of exploitation that we see against workers out there in many sectors of our economy and across our economy. What we exposed in Sports Direct, I mean, you're absolutely right, it was the tip of the iceberg. And you can walk into anywhere, as you can certainly walk into any hotel, bar, restaurant here in Brighton, and you'll find very, very similar levels of exploitation, very similar contracts of employment, perhaps, but certainly contracts with workers on very short hours, on 0-hour contracts, many of them. And you'll find that in other sectors of the economy as well. I go to warehouses, I've worked with transport workers, drivers, lorry drivers, bus drivers that are employed on short-hour contracts now, in what is a regulated sector of the economy. And in hospitality, we've launched a very similar campaign, the Hospitality Charter, the Fair Decent Work Charter for hospitality workers. Is rolling out now. We've been down launching that in Brighton this week at the Holiday Inn. But that's a national campaign. It's got particular relevance in London and in Scotland, where we've got support internationally from the International Union of Food Workers to put organisers on the ground, actually trying to find ways, because there is no model for this, trying to find ways of organising precarious workers. And often that is about reaching out to those workers in the first instance, because it's incredibly difficult, and much of it is hidden. You're absolutely right. You make the point that a lot of the abuse is hidden abuse. And making contacts or even identifying these workers in the first instance is an incredibly difficult task, let alone building relationships with them and very often trust with them. And they have no trust. There's no trust with us at Sports Direct in the first instance. Now we've done an awful lot of work, of course, to build that trust and hopefully to give them some confidence as well, to eventually organise that workplace and make that workplace a decent place of work. But we're not there. We're not there yet. We've had to find new and innovative ways of trying to organise those workers in their communities because we haven't got access to their workplaces. And they wouldn't talk to us outside their workplace in any event because of the fear of being identified as an activist, a trade unionist, a sympathiser, a troublemaker, and they simply wouldn't receive any further work. So 0 hours if you've already explained, I don't need to explain it again. I think it's very clear. The problems, the issues, the challenges for people that come from 0 hours, the insecurity of 0 hours contracts. At Sports Direct, they were employed on 366 hours a year. And this is a workplace that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. The only day it closes is Christmas Day. There is no excuse. There is no excuse for the employment on those contracts, or indeed via agencies, of workers at Sports Direct on anything other than a permanent direct contract of employment as workers, employees with Sports Direct. But they choose to employ via 2 agencies. And of course, those agencies choose to employ predominantly Eastern European migrant labour force. And those employers choose to empower those supervisors to control those workers. And in controlling those workers and dehumanising those workers, we uncovered the levels of abuse that we did inside that warehouse. People that were so scared not to come to work, that a pregnant woman came to work and miscarried in the toilet, gave birth to a child. In the 21st century in Britain, the 5th richest nation on this planet, and we're employing workers in such ways that they feel controlled to the point where they are at work when they most definitely should not be at work, and end up miscarrying in a toilet. And when we, under freedom of information requests to the National Health Service, uncovered information about the number and scope of ambulance calls, red and green calls to Sports Direct, we found there are 10 times more ambulances called to the Sports Direct warehouse at Sheffield than other comparable warehouse operations, where we have relationships, where we have health and safety reps, where we have a union organisation, but comparable numbers of employees doing very similar warehouse type work, 10 times. And in providing further evidence to the Select Committee recently, we did another FOI request, and those statistics still hold up. There are still 10 times more ambulance calls to the Sheffield site than the power warehouse, and 3 other late pregnancy related red light ambulance calls were made in the last 6 months to that Sheffield site. This is women that are having trouble late in pregnancy, they're at work, clearly they should not be at work, and they're rushed under red lights, blues and twos, to the hospital. So this is a huge issue. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to concentrate a bit about how do we try and engage with these workers. How do we try and find a model, an organising model, a union model, that empowers them, that gives them the confidence to build their union? Because the trade union is not building and cars and offices. The trade union is a collective of individuals get together to improve their working lives. So when you haven't got a relationship with a company, when you haven't got power, when workers are completely disempowered, how do you hurt the employer? How do you force the employer to take you seriously and allow access and gain trade union recognition and try to address some of the issues that you're confronted with? When you've got a real arrogant company, like I mean, he's a real arrogant bastard, yeah. And I remember the letter he sent to Dennis Skinner. Dennis Skinner is a local MP, covers Sheffield. Dennis wrote to him and said, I'd like to sit down and have a meeting about the impact of Sheffield, Sports Direct warehouse in Sheffield, on the local community. And he actually replied to him. And in his letter, he said, the closest you'll get to me is when I fly over you in my helicopter. And he was deadly serious about that. And he still hasn't met the local elected MP. He has no intention of meeting with Dennis Skinner. Or anybody, if he could get away without meeting with us, he wouldn't meet with us. I sat down for 6 hours with Mike Ashton, having discussions about some of the issues that we were confronted with inside that warehouse. And we've got another meeting scheduled to try to address direct employment, the transfer of agency work to direct employment, and access to the union. so that we can try and build union organisation inside that part. And the problem that you've got is you've got, apart from the obvious language issues and fear and lack of trust and the rest of it, is finding a route of access to talk, finding a space, a safe space, for people to be able to meet and talk without fear. Because they don't even talk, what we're exposed to, they don't even talk to themselves in fear that inside their own communities, loose talk costs lives. And they simply wouldn't be receiving any further work. And when they were brought over in the first instance, very often their housing was tied to the job. People came with their children, they found accommodation, it was tied by the agency to the job, and if they lost their job, they were out on the street, they had no further accommodation. We exposed, with Sports Direct actually, to be fair, the first case, or the first prosecuted case, of modern day slavery at Sports Direct. 2 Polish gangmasters were in prison for 6 years each in the first successful prosecution for modern day slavery, for supplying via an agency migrant labour into Sports Direct Charter Weather. So we did a lot of work at exposing all of this, but how do you build a strategy and a campaign that damages the reputation of Sports Direct to the point that they feel that they have to respond to that public pressure, because we haven't got industrial power. So we started our whole strategy, and it is a huge tribute to our Unite Community organisation. I'm incredibly proud of all of our shop stewards and all of our activists, but Unite Community in particular is, and they're our foot soldiers. They're on the ground, motivated to transform society in many instances, and they absolutely do that. They absolutely do that. They'll engage on the ground in campaigns, not just to organise workers, but to defeat sanctions and the obscenity of the welfare cuts regime that's been introduced under the guise of austerity and the rest. I mean, they're fires, political campaigns. And Unite Community picked up the challenge to try to organise sports, trying to engage in Sports Direct's work. And so we met in the communities. And we established learning hubs, and we opened up ESOL courses, English is second language courses. We developed the first online ESOL course, and it's free. It's a free course. We developed it, we offer it, we run it, and now hundreds of Sports Direct workers have come through that Unite Learn program, and that gave us access to them in the first instance. It wasn't a requirement that they join the unions. We just wanted to engage with work. And we wanted workers to start talking to one another and building trust and relationships between themselves. Now, of course, it's a slow burn around talking about trade unionism and what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to deal with the issues that they're confronted with. They complain to us, we're going to try and resolve them. So you've got to find a way in which we can do that. And Unite Community has been at the forefront of it, and reputational risk has been at the forefront of the strategy. So how do we hurt their reputation? How do we take them out of the FTSE 100? Halving their share price by damaging their reputation. Their share price plummeted in 12 months from over £8 a share to £3 a share. We personally took £1.8 billion from Mike Ashley's personal wealth. His personal wealth. Because, of course, he owns 60% of the shares in Sports Direct. It's his business. It might be a listed business, but it's his business. 60% of Sports Direct is owned by Mike Ashley personally. And he exerts that authority over the business. So collapsing his share price, putting him out of the FTSE 100, and then the associated knock-on when it comes to automated share purchase for FTSE 100 businesses and the rest of it, collapsed the value of his business, which I didn't know how important that was to him until we met. And he was quite open about it. And he said, you really fucking own it. You really, because he was trying to buy, he's quite blunt as well, let me have quite good opinion. He was trying to buy into an operation in America, in North America. And he was buying shares in a business that was up for, it was threatened with liquidation. It was called Dick's Sportswear. And then we found out, of course, that they sold guns in there as well. So we ran a campaign, only Dick's sell guns. Which really, but he couldn't raise the capital. The capital value of his business had collapsed to the point that he couldn't raise additional capital to acquire the business. So his whole strategy of acquisition and growth in overseas markets and the rest of it was stuck because of the share price. Sometimes you do things you don't understand fully the impact of what it is you're trying to do. We decided we'd take the case to the Select Committee in Parliament and expose it publicly, politically. And that was a fantastic opportunity to sit in front of the Select Committee and take them systematically through the level of abuse, not just in sports threats. I know it's focused there, but you find this abuse in so many workplaces now. And we took that decision that politically we were going to do that because we wanted to expose them in the press, public. We wanted to damage the reputation. Unfortunately, you got to damage the business. But we wanted deliberately to do that because it's the only way that we can see of forcing Mike Ashley to the table, to the negotiating table. And so we ran a very successful public campaign, and you would have seen it, and you saw some of it on the video earlier. But we did banner drops. We hit the England game. We hit a lot of Newcastle games, of course. Mike Ashley supports, we owns Newcastle. So we did banner drops. And people rolled banners up around their stomachs and got in, and then they unveiled them and traipsed around the ground. It was brilliant when it was live TV on a Sunday, you know. And we tried to do all sorts of innovative things. How do we think outside the box? Because we're used to organising in a traditional way, traditional workplaces where you've got a lot of people in the same place, and let yourself a steward, get out there, start talking to people, and people can see the benefit. You win collective bargaining, and you start to talk about pay and terms and conditions, and process, and fairness, and all that. You weren't doing that. That wasn't an option for us in sportswear. It was an aim in sportswear, but it wasn't an option for us. So how do we make this relevant to us? So we linked up with shareholders. We did a very successful share action, which saw Keith Halliwell at the last AGM lose. He lost the vote of the independent shareholders to remain chair of Sports Direct. The first time that a trade union resolution has successfully effectively brought down the chair of a publicly listed company. And that didn't just happen. It happened because there was a lot of work put into trying to explain to shareholders, often not interested in workers' rights, of course, only interested in what's the buck at the end of the day on the shareholding that they've got, how the reputational risk that was associated with continued ownership of shares in Sports Direct was going to damage them. It was going to have a knock-on effect and damage them. And we won that argument with them. They voted with us. And the only way to keep Halliwell survive is under the market rules. That's to reconvene a meeting within 3 months, put him to the vote again. But at that point, Mike Ashley could cast his vote. 60% of the shares in Sports Direct. Say to keep Halliwell. In the second vote, he lost more of the independent share vote than he did in the first one. And we've just tried to do it again to take him out as chair, and we just lost it. We just lost it at the AGM last week, 52 to 48%. 52 to 48%. But we're investigating there. There are a number of things that play. 12 million shares was taken out of the business and put into an employee share group and was then cast as independent shares. When they're not independent shares at all, they're completely controlled by the business. So there is now an investigation into that. There'll be a formal investigation into that, which could lead to charges being laid against Sports Direct in the finance market for the way they operated that meeting. And of course, if those 12 million shares weren't counted, not only would Keith Halliwell not have been re-elected as the chair, but 2 other directors wouldn't have been elected as chair, as board directors either. So there's a whole series of things in play. We're trying to give people confidence. We're trying to work politically to ban 0 hours contracts, to try and make sure that all workers' rights are available to all workers, not just employees, all workers. And we've got commitment from Labour, of course, and in the Labour manifesto, we're very clear about that. All workers from day one will have all workers' rights. And we'll extend workers' rights to a whole range of different initiatives. They will ban 0 hours contracts, absolutely right, they did it in New Zealand. And those self-same companies that couldn't possibly operate without the freedom and flexibility of a flexible use workforce are still operating in Auckland and in Wellington. Just, your Starbucks and your McDonald's and the rest of it are still operating today, but their workers, of course, are now on directly employed contracts with guaranteed hours, with access to a union, and under a sectoral collective bargaining agreement in the deal, which is exactly what we're going to do politically here. But it's not really a political solution that we need here. We need a workers' organised solution. We need a union solution. Because in that workplace, those abuses will continue. And they were quite horrific. Some of them sexual favours to get additional hours, to get a better accommodation, because your supervisor owns the accommodation, because the agency lent them the money to buy the flat when they first came over it so that they could put workers in it. It's like a tied cottage. And you put in there, and if you want better accommodation, well, you have to accommodate. And that level of abuse was taking place inside that warehouse, inside that community. Quite openly. All the control, completely powerless workers. All the control. Hiring and firing control, accommodation control, financial control, because how many hours you work depends on that's how much money you earn. All of the control was in the hands of the paymasters, really. And the gangmasters, if you like, were the supervisors. And the supervisors were put in positions of power by the agency. Deliberately, a deliberate strategy. This is a business decision to employ in this way. It's not an accident. It's a business decision. It's a corporate strategy to employ in the manner in which they did. And businesses spend hundreds of thousands of pounds trying to find the next opportunity to exploit once one loophole gets closed. So these were agency workers. They work their 366 guaranteed hours by the end of February each year. From that point on, they're working 40 hours a week. From that point on, they were effectively on a zero-hour contract. We won the end of zero-hour contracts in the retail operation. And yet now we see advertisements out for retail workers in sports direct back on zero-hour contracts. So he retracted on the promise that he gave and the action he actually took last year. And now all retail workers are back on zero-hour contracts. So we have to find a way of dealing with people like Mike Ashton. It's not the only one. Like I say, you can go to any workplace and you'll find abuse. And we need to find a way of convincing our organised workers to unite with that periphery of workers around them that very often, the truth be told, of course, they see in an advantageous way for themselves. Not their abuse, but they see the fact that they have a periphery, a disposable periphery around the shrinking core of organised workers as being quite useful to them. And I meet stewards that argue against organising the periphery because they see the periphery as their safety net. And we have to win that argument. It's not, that's common. So we have an internal argument to win, we certainly have an external fight to win, but we will do it. We will win the sports direct. We will ban 0 hours contracts. We will get employment rights from day one for all workers, and we will unionise. And they're starting to do it in the Donald tonight. Hats off to the Bakers Union. Starting to do it with the GMB in Uber and in various ASOS, various other places, and we're doing it across many sectors as a union ourselves. But as a movement, we need to find not a model, because I think there is one model, but we need to find a way in which we can better find and engage with workers that aren't naturally aligned to that movement, because it's only by collective organisation that we're actually going to win this at the end of the day. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I'd like to open it up for questions and comments from the gentleman there at the back.
Yeah, just there's two questions basically. How come a government department can send people to an agency that is supposed to be giving people full-time jobs? That's the first question. And the second question is, surely as an employer, you want people to train in the job. Let someone do it every day, for 2 hours in, 2 hours in. Because it's not its own interest to have someone who's skilled in their job. They're really loading boxes on there and they're making shoes rather than just picking shoes. The amount of people have got the job and let the rest find jobs work proper. This is what the union is trying to do. But there's some change to do with the government. The government trying to come to the point of what we do. It's able to put these people on the agencies rather than give them new jobs. Why would you
if I can just abuse my position of chair and make a comment on that, because that's something very central to the work that we've done in North Derbyshire over a number of years. I mean, it's not a recent thing that people have had to sign up for agencies in order to be able to claim benefits. When people go in, they have to sign a claimant commitment. Before that, it was called the Job Seekers Agreement. And DCS members in the job centre will tell us that nearly everyone who goes in will have to sign up to at least 2 agencies in order to receive benefit. And so when most people didn't see the Business Select Committee when the agencies sat before them, because Mike Ashley made the news alongside Stephen Luke. But the interview with the agencies was absolutely illuminating to how little they cared about what happened to the workers once they'd entered the workplace. And they knew nothing, they had no method of use of feedback. They tried to blag one, but they got laughed at in the meeting. But what was sad for me was that the politicians sat there and listened to this. But then they're actually overseeing the system of state-sponsored exploitation, because people have to sign up for agencies. And what appalls me is that wherever people have to do something compulsorily, it means that the quality of what is being offered is irrelevant, because people have to go there. If people had to choose whether they went to an agency or not, then they would have to compete, and they would compete on terms of quality. And the first thing that I would want a new Labour government to do is to make sure that no one had to sign up for an agency as a prerequisite to claiming benefits. And I think overnight that would have an effect of making agencies have to start to compete for work on the basis of upping their game. It's a very simple point, but one that I would like to be seen taken up politically. But unfortunately, it's not the primary issue that people talk about in terms of 0 hours in agency work. But as Helen pointed out, this underpins much of what's going on, and yet you very, very rarely hear those arguments or discussions taking place in this building when Congress, and yet they underpin everything that's happening to workers. Comes down to issues around welfare and benefits and the level of unemployment. It's an old adage, it's hard to get rights or improvement to your condition when there's people waiting at the door for your job, or people that can be forced into your job by the job centre. I don't know what else.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things on that. I mean, agency work, if you look at the agency workers regulations, which meant the government work for agencies, it's very clear that agencies are supposed to be providing temporary labour. Now we're finding case after case after case, very widely across the economy, of agencies providing direct workers on a permanent basis. They're not providing for the upturn in the market or the peak or the trough. They're providing direct labour, and the responsibility for the employment of workers has been outsourced by corporations to an agency. That's what they do. We had the horrific example recently of an agency advertising for workers in Doncaster. Those workers were on strike in the local authority. An agency was advertising in the local job centre for strike breakers, and was clear on the application form that you will be required to cross a picket line. They were recruited through an agency, through the local job centre, the state, and it's illegal to do that, by the way, because to employ an agency to break a strike is actually illegal in Britain. They were employing people to do exactly that, and were explicit about it, and were threatening unemployed workers with sanctions if they didn't. How obscene is that?
Yeah, I was just going to draw. I think the sort of the mirror image of the Sports Direct shame is partly the benefit shaming that we've seen in the national media as well. So the denigration of people claiming benefits to survive, or especially against working class women, is what creates an atmosphere where it's acceptable to have these kind of sanctions in place. And I think that speaks to sort of some of those issues in terms of like that hierarchy of society. When you can denigrate a particular group in that particular way, it becomes possible for the state to be used in a compulsive way against those individuals. We see that in terms of the changes that we've seen through the welfare system, but we also see that in terms of the migrant community as well. And obviously those things overlap, so that the denigration of the working class and the denigration of women overlap, particularly I think in terms of some of the kind of denigration of women with families and kids and having to claim benefits that we see there. That's the sort of ideological war which we see in particular parts of the press to whip up that hatred, which allows those kind of policies to come up. And in terms of challenging that, that universality again is absolutely essential to say that everyone is entitled to that.
Right?
I'm wondering, in the link between companies, very where did that come from? That come from the company?
Yeah, there is. It's a well-established problem that we have in the UK, short-termism, and looking at the quarterly report and their quarterly return and shareholder value, and it dominates public companies and the way that public companies are structured, their corporate governance structures, and the way in which they're viewed by a shareholder community, which is often, of course, a hedge fund somewhere or some other form of capital holding body that's just looking on behalf of a number of people, unidentified, invisible millionaires, billionaires from across the globe, to maximise the value of the share, even if that's in the long-term disinterest of the company itself. They will operate for short-term gain. And we've been doing a lot of work with Labour on this, about how we're going to change company law to force companies to look to the longer term and to make investment decisions and to support investment decisions by the state, to support investment decisions that look to the long-term well-being of the business, and also to look at the impact of decisions that they make on the wider community. The employees that are involved in the business, who have probably the biggest vested interest in seeing the success of the business, their livelihoods and their children's and the community moving forward, but also the community itself, the wider community itself. They have social responsibility businesses. I'm going to tighten up all those corporate social responsibility provisions and make them actually meaningful provisions that they will have to comply with. Company statute will change. And there's been a big debate in Europe about the European company statute. The EU actually were at forefront, and it was the British government that opposed measures. That's been outside of Europe, as Europe be able to get on and do a few things. The British state were the ones that were opposing most of the things that they actually wanted to do that were quite positive, So there are measures afoot to deal with it, but it's endemic, and it's a huge problem, and it's at the root of so many problems that we face, particularly with those big corporations today, in the way in which they treat the environment, the climate, workers, everyone.
I was just going to say, I mean, from the bottom line of the economy, the question over there about training, for example, and we don't provide training or any prospects, what's going to do it, not even in the long term, but in the medium term. Also, what about, all the tax money lost and so on, and, people not being able to afford to buy things, etc., etc. Very, very shortly, your economy and your society starts breaking down. And as Steve said, it is a choice. It isn't inevitable that it's raised to the bottom. And in societies that during the recession have looked to built up their welfare systems and, maintain their welfare systems, that they're actually doing a lot better than countries like Britain, who just went hell for leather, austerity, and intense exploitation.
Any other questions? Any more? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming along tonight. There are lots of copies of the report if you want to take them away. If you want an electronic copy, just get in contact with me and I'll supply you with an electronic copy. We'll be doing a local launch in Derbyshire on Monday where we will be getting workers who talk to the media who've experienced this. And that's never been an easy thing to get people to come and talk about, because people are frightened to put in their head over the parapet on these issues, and often the media don't see it as a story unless they can find a victim to talk to. So it's a difficult task for us, but we will try our best to keep this subject in the headlines. We will continue to work alongside Unite to try and make sure that we can start to really make an impression on not just Sports Direct, but right across the sectors. But most importantly, I think really workers do need, we have to have organisation, but workers do need support at political level. The Labour Party existed because the trade unions needed a political party that were going to make the environment easier for us to organise. And it is so hard to see how workers, no matter how well they try and organise it, they're employed by an agency or in a 0 hours contract. It's very difficult to see how those workers can be organised very easily. It's going to be such a long job. It does need political help. And so we will be working with all our colleagues to try and make it come about over the next few months. I hope you will assist. Thank you very much. There's still plenty of food and drink at the back. So you move.